For many years, it was widely accepted that Vivian Vance had signed a contract to put on weight in order to make Lucy appear smaller. All of that, however, was false. Lucy made it up at a party as a joke. For years, the world, somehow, believed it. What transpired behind the cameras was far more sinister in reality. There was suffering for Vivian that no one knew about. She had black eyes when she arrived at work. When her co-star passed away, she celebrated with champagne because she detested him so much. For decades, the business attempted to conceal these facts, but now everything she wished the world to know is at last being revealed. The 26th of July saw the birth of Vivian Roberta Jones. Kansas's Cherryvale in 1909. No stories or songs were told in her childhood home. It was governed by rigid Methodist doctrine and a mother who thought acting was a disgrace. Her mother told her that she would go straight to hell if she performed. Even though Vivian was the second of 6 children, she felt alienated from her own family right away. Her mother's values ran counter to her innate passion of entertaining. Additionally, her light was promptly extinguished each time she displayed it. There was more to her mother's distaste for acting than that. It was wicked, in her opinion. This led to an internal conflict in which Vivian's spirit repeatedly attempted to rise but was always compelled to kneel. She became accustomed to the stress, which would follow her for years. At the age of 6, Vivian's family relocated to Independence, Kansas. It was there that her fire really ignited. Not for enjoyment, but for freedom, she began to slip out at night. She was eager to perform. Despite her mother's opinion that it was improper, she still wanted to dance, sing, and perform live. She met someone who didn't criticize her dreams at school. She was given the opportunity to shine by a drama teacher named Anna Engelman. Vivian competed in beauty pageants and began cheerleading. And even studied under a young man named William Inga, who would go on to become a well-known playwright. However, things remained unchanged at home. Her relatives continued to try to shatter her spirit. Her mother retaliated more and more as she performed. Friends began referring to her as Viv, perhaps because it seemed lighter, more liberated, and untied to the world she was attempting to flee. Then the moment that made all the difference arrived. She did not use her family name. She decided to become Vivian Vance instead of Jones. She chose Vance in honor of a man who gathered traditional folktales, Vance Randolph. Perhaps she recognized herself as wild, unrestrained, and unafraid of what others thought in those stories. She relocated to Tulsa from Kansas to pursue stages as her family moved on without her. She was more than a simple flea. She was snipping the cord. She was no longer her mother's daughter. She was her own woman now. At the age of 21, she was among the inaugural performers at the Albuquerque Little Theater, a tiny venue, in 1930. She portrayed 2 aspects of her life on stage, a sensitive nun and a sensual woman. The building became known as the Vivian Vance Playhouse because of the impact of her performances. The community came together to support her after realizing her abilities. They even put on a benefit show to gather money for her to study acting in New York. She sang My Man in a brief review and rose to fame in the area. Her future suddenly came from doing everything she had been warned not to do. A bag of hopes and $50, she boarded a train for New York. At night, she auditioned while working as a waiter during the day. They were consistently rejected. She didn't give up, even though she frequently skipped meals to save money on metro travel. Finally, in 1932, she was cast in a chorus part in the Broadway musical Music in the Air, which played for 2 years. Now was her time. Slowly, people started to take notice of her movements, her delivery of her lines, and most importantly, her humor. The chorus girl was evolving into something more, little by little. When she was recruited at the last minute to fill in for someone in the 1937 play Hooray for What, she performed in more than 200 shows. This resulted in her most significant stage appearance in 1941, when she co-starred with Eve Arden and Danny Kaye in the popular musical Let's Face It. By the end of the 547 performances, Vivian had finally established herself. However, the agony persisted despite success. Despite the pain, she continued to move forward. Later, she traveled all the way to Africa during World War II to appear on another show called Over 21. The background no longer included her. Despite being the star, she was having a disastrous personal life. In an attempt to break free from her rigid family, she married Joseph Danek Jr. when she was 19. That didn't happen. 3 years later, he departed town, leaving her once more. She later wed Philip Ober, an actor, in 1941. That marriage was even more agonizing, but it lasted longer. Ober disliked that his wife was more successful than he was. He grew aggressive. She was beaten by him. He made her feel inferior. It was even pointed out by her future co-star Lucille Ball. But the harm was extensive. On the inside, Vivian was breaking, yet she continued to perform. When Vivian was touring with a play called The Voice of the Turtle in 1945, she suffered a breakdown. I laughed when she explained it in such a straightforward manner. It seemed as though she was going insane. Everything fell apart, including the strain of her marriage and the celebrity pressure she had experienced as a child. She began therapy and continued it for years. Slowly, she reassembled herself. She was altered by the encounter. She started going to mental facilities as someone who understood the suffering, not as a famous person. She didn't attempt to help others. All she did was let them know they weren't alone. She continued to perform. Despite the plaudits, her greatest theatrical achievement was, let's be honest, the result of 1,000 lost opportunities. She relocated to California to try her hand at filmmaking following the 1947 revival of The Cradle Will Rock. It was a failure. The Secret Fury, 1950, and The Blue Veil, 1951, were the only two films in which she appeared. In a musical, one producer promised her a dazzling striptease act. She declined. Mary Martin later became famous for that part. Additionally, she lost a role in Carousel because a choreographer wanted her fired in retaliation. The failures mounted. She didn't give up though. A significant event occurred in television in 1951. The role of Ethel Mertz in I Love Lucy was given to 42-year-old Vivian Vance. For many years, many thought she had made an odd pact, claiming that in order to appear more glamorous and compared to Lucille Ball, she had to put on weight, 15 pounds, to be exact. But there was never a contract like that. It was only a joke. At a party, Lucille made it up by making up rules like gaining 5 pounds every week and never being funnier than her. However, it was taken seriously, and the lie persisted for years. As a matter of fact, Vivian's weight merely evolved. She tried dieting constantly. And although Lucy might have wished to appear more attractive besides her, there was never a formal agreement. However, that myth went on to become one of Hollywood's most well-known tales. Prior to I Love Lucy, Vivian was one of the most well-known actors. She began performing on Broadway in the late 1920s. Even the legendary Ethel Merman was represented by her in 2 of Cole Porter's shows. She earned main roles of her own by the early 1940s. She was on stage in a play in La Jolla, California, in 1951 when Desi Arnaz and producer Jess Oppenheimer happened to catch her. They immediately hired her. "You can't play Ethel," Lucy remarked, glancing at Vivian when she realized she wasn't happy. "You are my age. The color of your hair is the same. You are too attractive." In order to correct that, the crew made Vivian wear clothing that was excessively tight and applied makeup to make her appear uncomfortable. They wanted Lucy to take center stage by making her appear older and less glitzy. Vivian had no idea who her on-screen spouse, William Frawley, was when she first met him. She asked, "Who's that old man over there?" turning to face Desi. Upon learning that he would be portraying her spouse, she chuckled and remarked that he resembled her grandfather more. Frawley never forgiven her after hearing it. She was detested by him from the start. Their genuine tension was incorporated into the act, and their dislike persisted. But her conflict with Frawley wasn't the only one. Also, Lucy and Vivian had disagreements. During her pregnancy, Lucy once yelled at Vivian for being late. In retaliation, Vivian said something so scathing that Lucy had to chuckle. They became a great comedic duo after that day. They made magic on TV, even if their fights were real. History was made by Vivian in February 1954. Her Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress made her the first female Emmy winner. The Emmys established a new category after she won for her performance as Ethel in 1953. It demonstrated just how crucial supporting characters were. 3 additional nominations were made for Vivian in 1954, 1956, and 1957. But despite the recognition and the award, she felt stuck. Once a gorgeous Broadway actress, she is now solely known to the public as Ethel, the plain landlady. In addition to making her a legend, the Emmy forced her into a role she thought would never end. And money turned into a battle. She made the same amount of money as Frawley in Season 1, $280 each week. By Season 6, however, she was earning $7,500 a week. It wasn't serendipity. It was as a result of having a powerful agent who consistently requested higher compensation. Women rarely asked for extra money in those days. Vivian didn't settle, though. Even more was requested when she joined The Lucy Show in 1962. She wanted to be identified right away. More influence over how things were done, and finer clothing. She didn't hesitate to demonstrate her value. In 1952, one of the most cherished scenes from I Love Lucy took place. It was the moment in the chocolate factory when Lucy and Ethel were packing chocolates on a conveyor belt. As they panicked as the chocolate accelerated, everyone laughed. In the background, however, it was not amusing at all. The machine continued malfunctioning and accelerating at random. For every attempt, Vivian had to eat chocolate repeatedly. Towards the end, she felt quite nauseous. A harsh price was paid for what appeared to be pure comedy. The renowned Vita Mia to Vega Men ad sketch was filmed by Lucy in the same year. Although Lucy's slurred lines and inebriation from a health tonic appeared amusing, it wasn't acting. The prop tonic was authentic and consumed 23% alcohol. Its strength escaped the crew's notice. By the time the last takes came around, Lucy was truly intoxicated from having to swallow spoon after spoon. Even though she was hardly able to stand, the scenes were classic TV. It demonstrated how early television occasionally pushed performers to risky extremes. Although Vivian was deeply hurt, her 1953 Emmy triumph meant the world to her. In her lovely speech, she thanked Lucy for her friendship and encouragement. However, she battled with constantly being second best on the inside. Her voice could fill a theater, and she was talented and beautiful. But Ethel was all that the world saw. At 44, she won an Emmy, but instead of gaining fresh jobs, she continued to land the same kinds of roles. She was caught by the same prize that had crowned her. Finally, in 1954, Vivian was able to showcase her musical abilities. She possessed a voice that could rival Broadway performers and had studied opera. She worked very hard to get Ethel-focused episodes like Ethel's Birthday, in which she was able to sing at last. Her voice was graceful, strong, well-trained, and lovely. However, she was often made fun of by William Frawley, who claimed she was incapable of singing. Fans, however, adored those episodes. Vivian was given a chance to shine for once. She was a little more of a star before the Ethel label took over. By 1956, celebrity had become threatening. As a result of I Love Lucy's global success, fans started to transcend boundaries. Every week, thousands of letters were sent to Vivian. Some were charming. Others were frightening. In public, some people followed her. Unlike today's stars, she was not shielded. The only way she felt secure enough to stroll down the street was to hire her own protection. She was afraid of the popularity that brought her wealth. Millions of strangers had come to love her because of television, and not all of them understood the difference. Vivian and Frawley continued to drift apart. He should portray her father, she had previously joked when the episode debuted on October 15, 1951. His age was 64. She was 39 years old. To be cast as his wife made her feel ashamed. He retaliated by calling her a sack of doorknobs during practice after overhearing her conversation. Frawley detested working with her and her voice, according to Desi Arnaz's subsequent writing. Their distaste for one another was obvious. It filled the studio. In 1953, things deteriorated. Frawley was consuming excessive amounts of alcohol. On set, he was frequently intoxicated and had to conceal his trembling hands in his pockets. During bouts, he isolated himself in his dressing room and would not listen to directors. It was too much for Vivian to handle. Separate dressing rooms were what she demanded. Desi had to prevent them from completely leaving the set. They avoided each other off camera as much as they could after that. Desolate Studios presented a spin-off series about Fred and Ethel to both actors in 1955. It might have brought them both wealth. Frawley immediately agreed, but Vivian refused, saying she had no intention of ever working with him again. She expressed her doubts to the producers that the show would succeed without Lucy and Ricky. Everyone was astonished by her refusal. They were dubbed golden chemistry by Hollywood. Even if it was hateful. Vivian, however, favored peace over money. She was more hateful than she was hungry for attention. The last chapter then appeared. William Frawley passed away on Hollywood Boulevard from a heart attack on March 3, 1966. At a dinner gathering that evening, Vivian was present. When she heard the news, she didn't halt or mourn. "Champagne for everybody," she added, lifting her glass instead. It was serious. There was a party. Neither did she attend his funeral. There were no flowers from her. She didn't say a word of kindness. His passing was the final straw in their 1951 started conflict. And it didn't truly end even then. It just ceased. Vivian and Lucille Ball, who had always had complete control over the set, were at odds all the time. They were now having trouble finding creative space after being America's comedic darlings since 1951. Vivian felt suffocated. She made a devastating decision after 3 years. She left. She startled everyone by leaving the show in 1965, at the height of her second television success. Not only was she giving up a role, but she was also giving up fame and security. And the opportunity to change her reputation. She had previously been making guest appearances on the Red Skelton Hour from 1960 until 1962. She played the witty Clara Appleby in a sketch titled The Iceman Geth that aired in February 1962, demonstrating that Vivian didn't require Lucy to make people laugh. In 1960, she also appeared in Appleby's Forecasts. She was able to establish something significant for both the industry and herself thanks to these roles. Her range was considerable. She was able to stand alone. She was more than simply Ethel from the Mertz apartment, as many people realized for the first time while watching In the Millions. However, not all chapters received acclaim. She attempted to make a comeback to Broadway in 1966 with Don't Drink the Water, directed by Woody Allen. It was to be the return of her. It became a public catastrophe instead. Another actress took her place when she was fired after early screenings. It wasn't made any simpler by Woody Allen's own admission that she wasn't a good fit for the role. In front of peers and critics, the rejection took place. In the absence of her, the play played for 598 performances when it opened in New York on November 17, 1966. This setback was devastating. She was confined to her previous role once more, remaining Ethel forever. It seemed like sadness increased with each step away from Lucy. Vivian had switched from comedy and the stage to something more reliable but less glitzy by the 1970s. Playing the role of Maxine, she became the happy face of Maxwell House coffee ads. "Could be the best instant of your day," she said as she smiled while handing out coffee in one of the most memorable advertisements from around 1976. Although she did a good job in these comfortable and recognizable advertisements, she secretly understood their meaning. She had outlived her desire for dramatic parts. Back in 1953, she had already taken home the first ever Emmy for supporting actress. All she wanted to do now was remain visible. Acting together, they appeared to be bound by the same destiny as Margaret Hamilton, best known as the Wicked Witch. Loved for one part, forgotten for the rest. A lovely thing occurred in 1977. She was asked to film Lucy Calls the President, a one-time CBS special, by Lucille Ball. Vivian was the neighbor once more. For many who watched, it was simply a lovely reunion. The fact that Vivian had a stroke while filming, however, was not well known. Despite her best efforts, she managed to maintain her old Viv's charm, humor, and sharpness on film. The reality, however, was harsh. She was feeling ill. She would make her second-to-last appearance at that special. Sam with Mark Harmon, a brief television series, was her last. Low numbers weren't the only problem she was battling behind the scenes. Her cancer was breast cancer. And she had spent years coping with it. Not all of Vivian's story was about humor and celebrity. It dealt with grief, resiliency, and heartbreak that most people never saw. Her 1933 first marriage had been an absolute misery. She had to go to a women's shelter to avoid Joseph Danick's violence after only 2 years because he was terribly envious. For decades, she concealed this information. However, it influenced everything that followed. Men started to frighten her. Her nervousness increased. Regretfully, the pattern continued. Philip Ober, her second husband, added to her misery. He struck her so severely in 1954 while filming I Love Lucy that she arrived at work with a black eye. Makeup couldn't cover it up. When Lucille Ball saw it, her rage erupted. "I'll get a divorce if you don't." "For you," she said. Nothing, however, could repair the harm. When her career was booming and Ober's was collapsing, his jealousy became violent. He became even more irate despite Desi Arnaz giving him brief roles on the show to defuse the situation. Exhausted, scared, and stuck was Vivian. All of this suffering continued to mount an emotional toll. When she was touring for a stage play in 1945, she experienced her first mental breakdown. She was later diagnosed with anxiety neurosis, a condition that stems from her toxic relationships and early life. A second breakdown in 1974 is mentioned, one that may have required electroshock therapy, though specifics are few. She clearly fought mental illness throughout her life, long before it was publicly discussed. At a period when mental health issues were taboo, she suddenly became a voice for those in need. However, she hardly ever discussed her inability to conceive, which was her greatest anguish. Early in her marriage to Ober, she miscarried, and nothing worked out. She was broken by each failed attempt. It was made more difficult by witnessing Lucille Ball raise her own kids, Lucy and Desi Jr. Like a mother, Vivian cherished them. She mentored young actresses in an attempt to replace that void, providing them with the kind of care she was unable to provide for her own children. She never ceased feeling like she had failed, though, on the inside. She started fighting breast cancer in 1973. Once the cancer advanced to her bones, she had surgery, chemotherapy, and a mastectomy. She concealed the sorrow from others. On the outside, she worked, joked, and smiled. She was in pain, though, behind closed doors. Nevertheless, she continued. It was too late for even close friends to recognize the severity of her condition. She never desired sympathy. All she desired was a dignified existence. She had even been quietly suffering when she watched I Love Lucy. In 1977, she disclosed in interviews that she was compelled to maintain her weight in order to make Lucy appear slimmer. She was forced to maintain the impression of the dowdy housewife by wearing tacky clothing and subpar cosmetics. It was something she detested. Although she was fashionable and refined off-screen, the show didn't highlight that side of her. She needed counseling just to get through filming since the pressure wore her down. She was misdiagnosed with Bell's palsy in the 1930s after a portion of her face became paralyzed. However, she would link that to her early trauma years later. The body is responding to emotional suffering in addition to a physical ailment. Her looks, appearance, and how she was perceived caused her to become extremely self-conscious. She was never free of that insecurity. Following the conclusion of I Love Lucy, she received an offer of millions to continue the Fred and Ethel narrative in a new program. While William Frawley was prepared, she wasn't. He was despised by her. They had been in a poisonous relationship from the beginning. She once made a remark about his age. He was 22 years older than her, and he never forgiven her because he drank too much. She declined the spin-off when it was offered by CBS. It was not worth any amount of money to be close to him ever again. Lucille Ball came to see her in her last days, a few weeks before she died. In Belvedere, Vivian was lodging at a home. Nearby young woman Paige Peterson observed them spending the entire afternoon together. They burst out laughing. They wept. She was crying when Lucy departed. There was no word from her. Breaking, she simply walked away. Lucy's daughter, Lucy Arnaz, subsequently stated that her mother wept for months at losing Vivian. Although they had a history of conflict, they ultimately found a common bond in comedy that went beyond celebrity. Vivian Vance dictated a number of letters before she passed away on August 17, 1979, detailing how the industry had consistently abused her. That wasn't ladylike, producers responded when she expressed her desire to direct. At every turn, they impeded her. Those were not merely farewell letters. They served as her last appeal to the barriers she had battled all of her life.